Hello and good evening. My name's Brandon Farley. I'm with Cottonwood Orthodontic Labs. Today we're going to be training on the Mara Fabrication. This is a class that I taught at the ORG this year. If you didn't make it there, we would love to see you come. If you did, thanks for attending my class or attending the classes that we had. First, we'd like to get started with having the right tools. To follow along properly and to really understand what we're doing with this appliance, it's important to have a red, blue, and green Sharpie. We ask that you have a digital caliper and have plaster models. We find that having plaster models helps prevent bands or crowns from breaking to the mesial distal of those solder joints, and it also allows for the solder to flow properly. And it applies a lot more smoothly to the parts. Here we have our crowns already prepped, as well as our models prepped ahead of time. So just once again, that's a separate class, and we would always be happy to have you at the ORG if you don't know how to do this. So first step is we're going to review the bite setup. What we're doing is this is a class 2 bite correction appliance, and we take the lower model that's in a class 2 bite relationship and we advance that to class 1. I got this out of the Orthodontic Appliance Reference Manual that I purchased from Dentarum. One of the things that's important to understand about advancing from class 2 to class 1 with those models is often you'll find your upper and lower bite relationship go into a cross bite. So as you bring that forward, you might not be in a crossbite, but when you advance that, you become into a crossbite scenario. And you should call your doctor and see if they're planning on doing any kind of expansion, or if you should actually just shim out those upper large tubes in order to have proper clearance with the lower parts. This is a great illustration of how that can happen. This is a real-life case. On the left, you can see we're in class 1. The upper models are watermarked here, and the upper buccal cusps are marked in red, and the lower buccal cusps are marked in green. You can see as we bring this into class 1 relationship, the red marks go inside the upper green, indicating that you do have a crossbite scenario. And you can see how your lower arch is now wider than your upper arch. And this is going to create problems with binding of parts, or even just not even be able to have the patient bite all the way down on the appliance. So here we are in centric bite relationship. It's really important that if the doctor sends you a physical models, that they need to send you the physical bite registration as well, so that you can examine the appliance in centric. Everything about this appliance, we are building off of the centric bite relationship. And if they send digital models, they need to send that in occlusion so that you can reference and index that appropriately from your monitor. Here you can see that we're going to utilize a red pilot pin to index on the second bicuspids in their centric bite relationship. This is really going to be the starting point and the judgment, and it's going to allow us to understand where we're going with this appliance in the future. So next, I want you to measure out 5 millimeters mesial to the red mark, and then I want you to index that mark on both the right and left side with a green marker or pilot pin. After you've done that, you're going to put the two models together. You're going to use the lower red marks and align those with the upper green marks. So this takes us into the class 1 molar to molar relationship. So this is where you're going to start assessing how you're going to build your appliance and where you're going to go with that. With that being said, you need to examine your class 1 relationship and see what else is going on. You want to see how your edge-to-edge relationship is going on. You either want those anteriors just shy from edge-to-edge or right on to edge-to-edge. This might change with an anterior open bite or any kind of asymmetry that you run into with your models. It's important to make sure that the midlines are completely aligned. Very important. So next, we kind of want to talk about just what we use and how we examine our advancement into class 2. One of the hardest things is accommodating asymmetry in the bite, whether you have one side that's kind of semi-class 1 already or class 2, the molar to molar relationship from left to right might vary. It's always a balance and compromise between class 1 relationship and advancement and alignment of those midlines. I've kind of set up an assessment goal. Your primary focus is to get the class 1 molar to molar relationship. Secondary, make sure you don't have any underbites. Third, no cross bites. If you do, call the doctor, see how he wants to handle that. And then fourth, never exceed more than 7 millimeters of advancement. So once you've kind of finalized your bite setup and you're happy with what you see, I want you to mark either on your canines or your first bicuspids using the blue pin to indicate that's where you're going to be setting up your bite. So it's really important to understand where you're going. We don't really articulate these, so that blue mark indicates where we're trying to set everything up. So we can't stress enough the importance of these 3 little marks, especially if you're a larger lab and you're having other people set this up and it's going through multiple hands as you move along. It's really important for quality control. The marks indicate how much of advancement is taking place, so you, as the quality control or the manager, can know how much we've actually done and have some control over that. It's also an indication of what the technician was thinking about during bite setup as well as fabrication of the appliance. It gives a manager a better understanding of what's going on with the case. It can also be leading indicators of missing shims, shifted cams, or even a mix-up between the lower and upper appliances. Next, we're going to move on to crown placement. I can't stress enough how much these crowns need to fit tight. We crimp all of our crowns. There should be no movement. Just to ensure there's no movement, we always add sticky wax to help prevent any kind of shifting. The sticky wax is hard and brittle, so it will crack if any of those shift, and it's always a good indicator that that's happened. So next we're going to go on to spot welding. Here we're going to kind of get to the foundation of our appliance. Really setting the archwire tubes is the primary, or it is the foundation of this appliance, because it's going to set up the rest of the alignment. So first you're going to start out by picking out your archwire tubes. You want to bend those feet to about 15 degrees. This is going to help you have some room for proper tack welding, as well as if you need to like laser weld it on there just to have a little bit more setting. But it really does help make sure that you've got a good tack weld. We utilize a tack 2 welder along with these alligator clips to help be a little more tactile. We set our tack 2 welder to about 40 to 45. If you don't have a tack 2 and you're using like a Dentarm welder, you're going to set that on like the highest setting, number 5, that you can. And occasionally you are going to blow some holes through these bands. You want to make sure those alligator clips are clean, and you want to make sure the bands or crowns are free of wax and debris, so that you don't get you don't blow holes through your crowns or bands. So excellent. So there you go. We're going to set that welder to 40 to 45 and start just by placing those in ideal position. So you're going to want to make sure you shoot for those archwire tubes to be in the middle third of those molar bands or crowns, and then right in the center. And then the next assessment is you kind of want to see how your archwire tube's going to line up with the rest of the model. You can see here it's not necessarily in the ideal position per tooth, but it is in that middle third or the median third of each one of those arches. And then you can see the green lines indicate that we're right in the middle of those molar crowns or bands. Next, we're going to be looking at spot welding for the large tubes. But we want to assure that the archwire tubes are set correctly. So we're going to kind of go over those really quick. You want to make sure that the mesial of that upper archwire tube is where the distal of that lower archwire tube starts. And that's indicated by the green line. Once again, confirm that your archwire tubes are parallel to each other. That's our main focus. Okay, archwire tube placement is done. Let's move on to setting the cams. Okay, so you're going to start by cutting the cams to an approximate size. Leave a little extra length. You want to be able to move this 2 millimeters anterior or posterior in order to make sure that you can adjust your advancement and make sure your midlines are in place. Once again, we're using our alligator clips to help place these, and our spot welder set to 40 to 45. Now, one of the biggest tricks is sometimes this is an appliance you have to come back and do small adjustments on. You're not always going to get it right the first time. But one of the indicators you can do to help make sure you're getting your proper cam placement is by kind of drawing or seeing that median line down the posterior cusps and aligning that cam. You can see we're using that foot of that cam to be parallel with that, okay? Next, the stem should be parallel with those archwire tubes. Once again, we said that that archwire tube is the foundation of your appliance. You don't want that canted forward or back, okay? Also make sure that the cam is below the occlusal of the crown. You do not want the patient biting on that. That will cause rocking, breaking loose of the appliance, and or just breaking of the parts. And the cam should always, the cam stop should always be 3 millimeters forward of that archwire tube. This is a real case being put together in real time, so it really indicates when you follow these rules how everything can come together. Next, I like to always mark my cams so that I can adjust that mesial or distal in the future and know where I'm going with that, okay? So now we're going to move on to the upper. We're going to start spot welding the tubes. So with that being said, we've got this little alligator clip we like to put on the other alligator clip, and then you should grab a selected matched tube and elbow. It is super important to have an elbow that's matched with the tube. If you have too much play in your elbow and tube relationship, you can jump your cams because they can just have too much play in that appliance and it rocks back and forth. Oop, I went the wrong way. Let's see that. So what I like to do, let's see if we can get this video to play here. So, man, why are you not playing? There we go. Come on. Let's see. I think it's going there. Yep. So you can see there, we use that alligator clip to slip into that tube. And we're going to put it on that archwire tube. And we like to kind of generally set it about 1 millimeter away from the band. And then once again, you're going to draw that posterior line of that arch like you saw on the upper. And you're going to make that parallel to that. And make sure that you get a good placement of that tube for starters. You might have to rotate that tube around in order to make sure, but you just get it set in there. You also want to make sure that you're placing that mesial of that tube flush with the mesial of the lower archwire tube. Here's a close-up picture to kind of see that. Once again, the large tube is mesial with the large tube is flush with the mesial of the lower or of the archwire tube. So, and then once again, you want to make sure that the large tube is not above the occlusion. If they start biting on that, they're going to rock that crown or band loose and or break the appliance. So now we can assess our advancement. So what you want to do is you want to grab a 2 millimeter spacer and place that on each one of your elbows. Insert your elbows into the tubes, and then you want to occlude the models together and see how your advancement is. So here we're taking a look at our advancement. Confirm that the proper of the indexing models of the upper and lower are right where you originally set them. And you can see in this one, that's true. Confirm the left and right sides are equal. And then you're going to want to make sure your midlines are on. Now you're asking yourself, well, what if things are off? Don't worry. We'll circle back to that. The next photo is going to show all three of these photos in a little detail. I'll leave it there for a few seconds for you to kind of enjoy. Once again, you notice midlines are straight on, and then your left and right blue marks are accurately hitting. So sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you have to do this 3 or 4 times. You have to move those around. So we're going to talk about how we adjust this. So the next thing is you also want to assess how you're hitting the elbow against that cam. You want to make sure you get good engagement as well as what I call timing of engagement. You don't want one side on the bottom of that cam and then for example, the left side would be hitting on the bottom of that elbow, and then the right side would be hitting on the top. That means you're going to get bad timing, and when you go into engagement, it can shift that jaw around and cause you to jump your cams. So this is a good example of how we can assess that the cam and elbows are placed properly in relationship to each other. So one thing you want to ensure is a 50% split of the elbow by the cam. You can see right here that that elbow is split right by that cam. You can see 50% of it to your left and 50% of it right. The cam should be offset facially to avoid locking with that lower archwire tube right down here. So just checking. Next here, as you see here, we can see that we have very square engagement. And once again, to your upper right, you can see you have that 50-50 engagement with that cam. And then on the lower right, you can see that you're avoiding that archwire tube. And if you don't have that offset enough, you can get locked into place. So be very careful of that. So this is another angle, and the lines help us show two different things. The blue and the red line show us that our upper tube and elbow are all in a parallel alignment with the cam. Then the blue and the green indicate that we're about 50-50 split on that cam. So we've passed that. Now what happens if we see some failures? Let's look at what we can do for adjustments. So let's go into that. Here we go. So before you get into adjustments, it's a smart idea to index all of your archwire tubes around your bands. That way you know where you're moving things and where you're going. As you can see here, we just go right around that archwire tube and mark it using a Sharpie. And then we do the same thing on the lower, and once again, I'm going back to that. Make sure you index that cam where it is for your anterior-posterior relationship. And that's how you can adjust your midlines and advancement. So one thing that's important, you can always rotate that upper large tube if you need to get better engagement, or split that. You want to make sure it maintains a parallel relationship with the lower cam on your right. If you need to offset that upper tube further out, we recommend bending out the archwire tube legs to 90% in order to accommodate any kind of clearance issues. Here's a close-up of what that can look like. Okay. There we go. Next, here's a photo kind of showing all three things at the same time. You can see that the upper archwire tube is in alignment with everything else, and you can see how we shimmed out that archwire tube in order to create the clearance we need. This is another angle in order to better illustrate how that shimming works out. The red line indicates the clearance from the lower archwire tube. Now, if you need to adjust your midlines, please just move your cams. So all I want you to do, I don't want you moving that archwire tube. I want you to bring those cams forward and back in order to do any adjustments like that. So we have some real-world examples here. Also an expansion case. This is really important. So we actually use elbow shims in order to set up. So if they're doing expansion, you're not going to be able to put those elbows into those tubes and have proper engagement. So what you have to do is use some kind of shim in order to know where you're going to end up. We usually use 3 and 6 millimeter shims in order to assess for expansion. Here's a close-up of what that shim looks like. Okay, next on to soldering. This is great because we're going to kind of just quickly go through what we do. We want to first examine what we do to prep for soldering. We're going to use anti-flux first and prep the appliance for soldering by adding this anti-flux. This ensures that no solder flows into any of these tubes or covers any part that we find functional. I did speed this up by 1.5 times, as you see here. And then if you notice here, we're going to really focus on how we add the anti-flux to the cams. You want to make sure you don't get anything on the distal of that cam because that can change your advancement. Once again, we're just going to go in and add some anti-flux into the tubes and the hooks. And then you'll see here we're going to flip it and also get it some anti-flux on the tissue side of that cam to ensure that no solder glops up and inhibits that archwire tube from being accessed, okay? Okay, there you go. Next, let's do flux preparation. That's pretty straightforward as well. Once again, we've sped this up to 1.5 times. We're adding the flux in a quantity that we would like to see the solder be on there. That's kind of the rule of thumb. So pretty straightforward. Nothing too crazy here. There you go. Next, we're going to go into soldering. We're using a hydro torch. This is a really good method of soldering. I highly recommend that you purchase one of these if you don't have one already. If you notice here, he'll often get the solder started, smooth out the solder a little bit, and then let the solder cool down and become hard so that you can build it up and stack that solder on there. So he definitely utilizes a cooling process in order to stack the solder up nice and smooth. Let it cool down. Now watch, he's going to come back, and you notice he's even adding some flux to the actual wire itself there, and then he's stacking that solder on there. Okay, now you can see he's just using the same techniques to go over the cams. You can see that we kind of let it cool down, so we smooth, let it flow into all its small spots, pull the heat away, let it cool, and then we come back and stack. There we go. Okay, so next after that, we like to use the ultrasonic, and we put it in a container with some tartar removal for about 5 to 10 minutes. This helps remove all of that carbon and anti-flux and any additional unused, what's it called, flux. So I'd like for you to kind of see what the final output is before we do any kind of finishing. If you notice here, it's pretty smooth. You can see how we've stacked that on and covered the tube. Super important to make sure you cover that tube, especially if it's an expansion case and you're going to expand first. They might bite on that tube and bend it if you don't cover it. So we're almost done. So we have in our SWAT department, we call it solder, weld, acrylic, and trim. So we're just going to pretty much use a heatless stone and a black rubber wheel for final finishing. Occasionally, we like to use a carbide burr for the hard-to-get spaces, but, you know, it tends to be a little bit slower. So, you know, if you do a good soldering job, you should be able to smooth everything out, mainly with that heatless stone. We do like the black black rubber wheels because they tend to last longer than the red wheels. Anything other color than that, it just tends to be too soft and you go through a bunch of them. So we kind of finish up with our final prep. Next, we're going to work on cutting up the tubes. So we're going to put the tubes in there we're going to cut the elbows. So we're going to put the elbows in with the 2mm shims, and then we're going to measure about 2 millimeters to the distal of that tube. So you want about 2 millimeters of that elbow sticking out of the distal of that tube. Mark that with your Sharpie marker, and then you can just use a set of cutters to cut that short and then just smooth out the end. You know, there we're using a carbide burr. You can use a heatless stone and then just finish it up with a red wheel to remove any burrs. That also helps with any a smoother insertion of the appliance. So after that, we send it to the ESMA. So we do about 30 seconds of electro polishing on the upper and the lower. Really just helps clean the appliance up. And then after that, we take it to the micro etcher, and we always etch out our crowns or bands. So for the final cut, pumice and polish. Once again, pretty straightforward. We don't do anything too fancy here. Just regular pumice and polish. We like to just use Fabuluster, and then we're going to steam this off and sanitize it. So I really wanted to thank everyone for participating in the ORG, as well as anybody who was interested in this. Please reach out to our labs. If you can contact me at brandon@cottonwoodlabs.com if you'd like to set up a time to do, if you have any questions regarding this. So you can also call the lab at 801-904-2006. Thank you so much.